Nice. It's nice to speak to you both today. I watched a movie yesterday and I thought it was fantastic. Really, really enjoyable. But I'm a real sucker for boxing stuff, but we'll get on to all of that. I want to go right back to the beginning for both of you. And how did you kind of first both come to be, well, how did you first come to kind of meet? And how did you first come to be involved in this project? And at what kind of stages did that all kind of take place?
We met years ago, I think. We sort of crossed paths, but we didn't really think of that. I didn't think I remembered that. I remember, so Mark Lane, the producer, brought this. We worked together on a movie called Retaliation, which was Romans originally years ago, and we really got along. And he had this idea, and we were throwing it back and forth, and then he passed it to Sean, and we were just over the moon when Sean was considering it because he's obviously epic, and this is his world. And actually, I think one of the things that was so good about getting Sean to direct it is as a DOP, we had a very small budget for this movie, but we had maybe three or four locations, very limited locations, really, the majority of, and he just made everything look kind of totally different. You never think you're in the same space twice when actually you are. So we met up with Mark Coulier, I think, we met maybe before that, but we went to see Mark when we hung out for the first
Yeah,
time.
we spent a lot of time at like Mark Coulier's studio where like we were working on the look of Orlando to make him look like a boxer, which was a really interesting process of going not far enough, going too far, and still having him look real and not looking like he was wearing a mask so it was Mark did some really clever things with noses. And remember you shaved cuts in your head. I
Yeah,
mean, there was like the haircut. Actually, I remember you did that haircut on a Zoom call with me
yeah,
one evening.
yeah.
He called me out. He said, "I'm thinking about doing this sort of." I imagine he cut his own hair, and then he took some clippers and he went like this, and I was like, "No!" Like it wasn't that long before we were filming, and then he sort of left a bit at the back, and it looked a bit mullety, like he had a
Which we kind
mullet,
of
and I
like because I
was.
couldn't get to the back, and I was like, oh, that would be great.
And then he sort of just left it like that, and it looked really good. So he said, "Yeah, that's it. Don't keep it like that." So then that was maintained through the shoot, and then obviously there was the broken nose, which changes the face enormously, and then the ears and bits of scars and stuff, and you had some lids on your lids as well.
Yeah,
So there was some very subtle bits there, but the overall thing was quite amazing to a point where I remember we were filming a scene where you were just standing in the hallway of the hotel in your pants, and there was two members of the public, two girls on their phone that were waiting for the elevator to leave, and I was standing behind them, and I could see one of them nudging the other one, and she went, "Is that Orlando Bloom?" And the other one looked, and she went, "No." And then they got in the elevator and went down. So yeah, I was very happy that we'd actually managed to get to that point where you sort of do a double look physically, but without it being, you know,
yeah,
it doesn't get in the way of the performance, which often that stuff can.
yeah. I mean, Mark was so good for that, and yeah, getting the makeup on every day, she was great.
And Sean, I wanted to ask, because I'm a huge fan of your career. I've met you a couple of times in the past at sort of different
Yeah,
things.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
From Cashback, obviously, I mean Metro Manila, I loved Anthropoid, but every film of yours is so different from the last, I find. Is that a kind of conscious move on your part to keep trying different tonalities, different genres? And would you say there's a kind of through line, something that maybe connects all of your kind of work together, a kind of running theme, perhaps?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'd hate to make the same film all the time, but maybe I'd be a more successful director if I did. Um, but I'm always looking for something that's really gonna motivate me, and I need to be passionate about it. And so once I've sort of done a project, I'm sort of looking for something else because it feels like I've sort of done that. So I'm looking for something else to get passionate about. Um, I think I've been asked about themes in my films, and I think there's probably a common theme of sacrifice generally. Most of my films have dealt with it in some way. Um, self-sacrifice or the sacrifice of something in order to, and what people are willing to do to get something that they feel that they need. So I think that's a common theme. I think, I don't know, would you agree?
Yeah, I can see that. I think that's, yeah, 100%. But so obviously in this one, and definitely that's definitely the case. And Metro Manila, I think that's quite rife as well. But I
Yeah.
mean, obviously in that kind of theme of people doing whatever it kind of takes. I mean, Orlando, I wanted to speak about the kind of physical kind of changes and stuff. I mean, I was reading, according to the very trustworthy IMDb trivia, it said 52 pounds in 3 months, which is kind of, I mean, that's remarkable. I mean,
30, I think it was 32. 52 would
uh,
be crazy. I think it was about 32. I think about 32 pounds, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean, I'm about 185. I think I got back down to about 152 at my lightest.
Right.
Do we have that? I don't know. Anyway,
yeah.
it was a lot.
Asking for a friend who's going to a wedding in Cyprus in about 5 weeks.
Yeah.
How did you do that? No, but seriously, I mean,
Tuna and cucumber.
right, it's a serious thing. Were you working with a kind of nutritionist? And I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
you're
No, I
so
wouldn't
bare.
recommend anyone do this at home. We
Yeah.
worked with this guy, Philip Goglia, who's a nutritionist in LA, who something my agent told me about. He'd worked with Christian Bale on some stuff, and he was really it was really a science. He was doing my blood work to make sure that I was like, moving forward, and just tiered me down from 3 meals to 2 to 1 to like just protein shakes. Like, fortunately, I've got this delicious protein shake form. But that was the one thing I missed.
That's so, because I use that as well.
I love it.
Yeah,
that was the one thing I missed, was my form shakes. When I had to then come down to basically 3 weeks or more of just tuna and cucumber, like religiously 5 or 6 times a day to keep the protein intake. Cucumber's kind of like a diuretic, but it was a lot. It was really a lot, and it was a lot on my headspace. My noggin was definitely upside down and roundabouts. A little bit of paranoia, a little bit of like questioning it all, but it was, it definitely lent itself to playing, boxer and understanding the degrees that somebody will go to have that second shot at a title, at life, at feeling good enough, feeling that they're living their dreams.
Because I mean, the notion of a kind of a comeback is something that's very kind of rife in kind of in sport, but also kind of in the film industry. Be it after big kind of big roles or just even just taking a break. So many kind of actors and directors will do a project that will be labeled as like a comeback performance or something. So Orlando, were you able to kind of draw on any of your experiences for this role? You said obviously rather than stepping into the ring, it would have been stepping onto set, maybe after a little break or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw this as a really great opportunity to go in on a character study of a guy that is, I think that fighters are, I mean, I like, we talk about Raging Bull, or I like The Fighter, great movies. Fighters that we sort of see in flashback, the kind of what's required and what that history is. So I mean, I just sort of thought it was a sort of now or never moment for me in some ways, to just burn the barn down and go full throttle, take the brakes off and see where you land, kind of thing. And this was the opportunity to do that. I don't think there's anything I've not done anything like it before, so I can't relate it to anything. But it was definitely unique. I suppose, I think, I played with the dialect. I had this great young guy, Louis, who is the son of my dialect coach, Jerry, from Ireland, and he's actually Irish, and he's actually was a boxer, almost turned pro, and then decided not to. But so he was sparring with me, living with me, and we were just talking, we were just riffing with the Irish lilt the whole time, just to find the little subtle nuances and find the way. Just, he would even, like, when we were running lines, he'd be like, well, you could say, when I get off the plane, I go, that's flash what, which is a little bit like, that's a real Irishism, and from where he's from and stuff. So we were playing with it, but it's not really like anything I've done before. I can't really relate it to any of that, but but it was definitely
I'm excited for people to see it, because it's definitely not what you're known for in that sense.
I'm not
it's
like
something
I'm
completely different. It's like,
yeah, yeah, for
It's
sure.
exciting in that respect.
Yeah, it is. I'm excited. I mean, I'm kind of a glass half full kind of, and boxing's definitely like, in it, mentally as well as physically.
Yeah. I mean, it's a wonderful cast as well. You were able to use here, sure. But I mean, in opening credits when you get actors where it says and then it says their name. John Turturro is such a great and actor. He's the sort of name you want to see on those kind of credits when it says and John Turturro. So what was he kind of like to work with on this project for both of you? Because he's such a wonderful performer from an audience perspective. He's just one of those faces you always
Oh,
want to see on screen.
Yeah, I mean, I've been personally friends with John for many years, and we have the same agent, Christina Bazdikas, and we've been looking for a project to do together for a long, long time, and then this came up, and I spoke to Christina. I said, "Do you think John might, like this?" And she goes, he's crazy about boxing. So we started chatting. He read it, and we started chatting, and we chatted for quite a few weeks actually before he actually said, "Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it." So I think he was sort of, I think in his mind he probably already had agreed to it, but he was like, we were having these conversations about who Boz was, and we were watching movies and coming back and having conversations. One of them being like The Hustler, and he was very much into the George C. Scott character in The Hustler, and I think that was kind of how he wanted to play it. And he had problems with certain lines, and we were figuring out how to change them, or certain ways of saying something, and so yeah. And then suddenly John was then on set, and it was kind of like John then just became Boz. I remember
yeah.
the producer and even you came in and you were like, "Wait, is that how he's playing Boz?" And I was like, "I guess so," because
He
I
sort
think he was written like a drill
yeah.
sergeant, like a little bit like Whiplash. He was going to be screaming and shouting and da da da. But then, actually, he was then the sort of
Seducer.
devil on the shoulder, where he was kind of, you don't want to do that, do you? You don't want to do that. So yeah, it was kind of very seductive the way that he played him, and it was really interesting. And and
Totally
again,
transformed it.
yeah, it totally transformed from what it was in the script to actually, he's like, I think it's a love affair,
Yeah.
and that was something that was kind of interesting, even to a point where at one point I was very much like, John Turturro's character is actually part of Boxer's personality. It's almost like he's manifested him as a sort of split personality. So, but yeah, John was just a real. Although I think on the first day we had a really bad day of shooting, and it was his first day. Do you remember we were in the
Mm,
desert,
mm.
and we had all sorts of problems, and we dropped a camera, and the door was open, and it was making lots of noise, and I think John just looked at it and said, "What the fuck is going on here?" He just like, it was like, looked like
What
some
have I
amateur.
signed up
It looked
for?
like some amateur hour, and and he was like, "You can't use that. You can't use any of that." And I was like, he goes, the door, the sound was too loud, the camera was making too much noise. And I said, yeah, well, look, we've always got time to reshoot if we have, which was a lie. But anyway, the next day he'd come in and he'd looked at the rushes, and he said, "I think that scene's going to cut. I think it's okay." And from that, there was some confidence that sort of came back after he looked at the rushes. So yeah, but up until that point, I was like, "Ooh."
He was so generous, such a great actor to work with. He definitely saw it as a love affair, and he was very encouraging to me, and he was like, I see what you're doing, and this is love, this is love. And I was like, wow, yeah, the heartbreak, the whole thing, the desire, it's like a three-way, because Katrina brought so much to the table just in a backstory that made it so authentic when we were on set. And then she being my original, like my life partner and trainer, and him seducing me away from her, and that becoming like a heartbreak in itself. It was really, really unusual and unique. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this movie before, and definitely buckle up. But it's like, I think it's so relatable. Everyone in life wants to have a second shot. Everyone makes mistakes and wants to kind of make good, or everyone wants to kind of like feel good enough and do it, and and you see that played out in Boxer. Really, it's articulated really well, I think. Relatable.
And I'm all out of time, but I just one very, very, very quick thing to ask before I go, because obviously he's called Boxer. I'm just interested to know, you don't have to tell me what it is, but did you guys give him a name, or did you just kind of leave it as quite abstract?
Well, he's known as the Wolf of Dublin, which is kind of like his fighting pseudonym, but we stayed away, and I think that was more Mark's idea. I mean, I remember Mark saying, I don't think he should have, and Justin, I think they've discussed it right from the beginning that we would never really know what his name was. And I thought that was an interesting, way of doing it. And so, but it does create its own problems, obviously nobody calls him by his name. So, there are those moments where if somebody's talking about him, although you're on the set, you're on the camera pretty much 90% of the time, it's, you do have those sort of problems where you can't say, oh, so-and-so. So there is that.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting exercise to try and do a character without a name.
Yeah, it makes it sort of transferable as well in a way, I think, it's like it could be anyone could be Boxer,
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. I can't wait to see this movie. Cool.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. Bye. See ya.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey, you guys!
Hey you guys!
Hey, that's what they all say.
Hey you guys!
Hey, you guys!